Have you ever looked at your partner during an argument and felt something strange happen inside you? Not just anger, not just disappointment, something older, something that didn't belong to this moment. Perhaps their words suddenly sounded like your father's criticism. Perhaps their silence felt exactly like your mother's emotional distance. Perhaps, without realizing it, you were no longer speaking to the person standing in front of you. You were speaking to someone who had lived inside your nervous system for decades. Most people believe they choose the people they love. They imagine attraction is spontaneous, mysterious, almost magical. They believe chemistry simply appears between two strangers. But what if chemistry is memory? What if the butterflies in your stomach are not announcing the arrival of your soulmate, but the return of a wound that never truly healed? And what if every relationship that broke your heart was not random at all, but part of a hidden psychological pattern your unconscious has been repeating since childhood? Stay with that thought, because somewhere inside you, beneath your opinions, beneath your preferences, beneath everything you consciously believe about love, there exists an invisible map. You did not create it intentionally. You inherited it long before you understood what relationships even were. That map has been quietly guiding every attraction you have ever experienced. You may think you are searching for love, but your unconscious may be searching for something entirely different. Close your eyes for just a second in your imagination. Picture yourself walking into a room full of complete strangers. Hundreds of faces, hundreds of voices, hundreds of possible futures. Why does one person immediately stand out? Why does your attention move toward them before your mind has time to explain why? Most people answer with words like confidence, beauty, kindness, intelligence. But those are stories created afterward. The unconscious decides first. The conscious mind invents reasons later. That feeling you call instant connection is often something much older than romance. It is recognition, not recognition of who they truly are. Recognition of who they remind your nervous system of. The most dangerous sentence people ever say about love is this: they just feel familiar. Familiar, such an innocent word. Yet familiarity is one of the strongest forces governing human behavior, because your brain has one primary responsibility above all else. Not happiness, not fulfillment, not growth, safety. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Your brain defines safety very differently than you do. Your conscious mind wants peace. Your unconscious wants predictability. Even if predictability hurts, especially if that pain is familiar. Imagine a child growing up in a home where affection is inconsistent. Some days they are praised, other days ignored, sometimes hugged, sometimes criticized. Love becomes unpredictable. Attention becomes something to earn. Approval becomes survival. Now fast forward 20 years. That child is now an adult, intelligent, successful, independent. They promise themselves they will never repeat the mistakes they witnessed growing up. Yet somehow they fall in love with someone emotionally unavailable. Again and again and again. From the outside, friends become confused. Why do you always choose people who cannot love you properly? The person asks themselves the exact same question. But they're asking the wrong question. Because they didn't consciously choose emotional unavailability. Their nervous system recognized it. And recognition feels strangely comforting. Not because it feels good. Because it feels known. The unconscious has a fascinating rule. Known equals safe. Unknown equals dangerous. Even when the known keeps breaking your heart. Think about how strange that is. A peaceful relationship can feel boring. A stable partner can feel emotionally flat. Someone who communicates clearly can seem less exciting than someone who constantly disappears and returns. Why? Because uncertainty has become associated with love itself. The emotional roller coaster feels alive. Calm feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels unsafe. Many people spend years chasing intensity, believing intensity is passion. But intensity and intimacy are not the same thing. Intensity often belongs to anxiety. Intimacy belongs to security. One exhausts you, the other heals you. Yet healing can feel frightening when you've spent your entire life adapting to emotional chaos. Your subconscious doesn't whisper, "Choose what heals you." It whispers something much quieter. Find what reminds you of home. Even if home was painful. Especially if home was painful. Because home became your emotional language. And every relationship afterward becomes an attempt to speak that language fluently once again. There is something extraordinary about the human mind. It constantly tries to finish unfinished stories. Notice how songs often leave you wanting the final note. Notice how unfinished conversations stay in your mind for years. Notice how unanswered questions echo louder than answered ones. The psyche dislikes incompletion. It seeks resolution. Now imagine the greatest unfinished story in your life wasn't a conversation. Imagine it was your childhood, the affection you never fully received, the validation that arrived too late, the apology that never came, the safety you kept waiting for. Those experiences don't disappear because time passes. They become silent instructions, invisible expectations, hidden emotional blueprints. Every relationship becomes another opportunity for the unconscious to whisper, maybe this time the story ends differently. This is why people often say things like, "I know they're wrong for me, but I can't let go." They aren't holding on to the person. They're holding on to the possibility that this time, finally, the old wound will close. They believe if this emotionally unavailable person chooses them, somehow the rejection from childhood will disappear. If this critical partner finally approves of them, perhaps the voice of their father inside their own head will finally become silent. If this distant lover finally stays, perhaps abandonment itself will lose its power. But notice what keeps happening. The ending rarely changes, only the actors do. The stage changes. The dialogue changes, the faces change. But the emotional script remains almost identical. Without realizing it, people become directors of the same psychological play. Every new relationship auditions for an old role. Every heartbreak echoes an ancient disappointment. Every argument awakens voices that existed long before this relationship ever began. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself. Someone forgets to text you back. Objectively, it's a small event. Yet your body reacts as though the world is collapsing. Your chest tightens. Your stomach sinks. Your thoughts race. Suddenly you aren't reacting to today. You're reacting to every moment you ever felt forgotten. This is one of the greatest misunderstandings about emotional pain. People believe they're responding to the present. Most of the time they're responding to accumulated history. The present simply unlocks the door. Everything behind it rushes forward. This is why emotional reactions often feel disproportionate. The argument isn't really about dirty dishes, or arriving home late, or forgetting an anniversary. Those moments become symbols pointing toward much older emotional realities. The unconscious speaks through symbols because it rarely communicates directly. It doesn't announce itself. It disguises itself. It wears the face of your partner. It borrows the voice of your spouse. It hides behind everyday conflicts, until one day you suddenly realize you've been arguing with ghosts, not imaginary ghosts, psychological ones, living memories disguised as present experiences. And perhaps the most astonishing part is that your partner is often doing exactly the same thing. Two people stand facing each other. Neither is truly seeing the other. Each is unconsciously seeing fragments of their past. Each is trying to solve childhood through adulthood. Each hopes the other possesses the missing piece that was lost decades ago. This creates an invisible dance. One partner pursues, the other withdraws. One fears abandonment, the other fears closeness. One becomes anxious, the other becomes distant. Neither planned this choreography. Their nervous systems memorized it long before they met. What appears to be compatibility is often complementary trauma, like two puzzle pieces shaped by different wounds, perfectly fitting, perfectly painful. Have you ever wondered why advice from friends rarely changes anything? They say just leave, as though walking away from a relationship were simply a matter of logic. But logic rarely defeats unconscious programming. Because the unconscious doesn't speak the language of reason, it speaks the language of emotion, of repetition, of familiarity, of survival. Imagine trying to convince someone to stop speaking their native language overnight. That's what asking someone to abandon familiar emotional patterns feels like to the unconscious. It doesn't hear freedom, it hears danger, it hears uncertainty, it hears exile. This is why people often sabotage healthy relationships without understanding why. Everything is peaceful. Everything is stable. Everything is respectful. Yet something inside whispers, no, nothing is missing. Something is unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity is often mistaken for the absence of love. What if real love feels quiet because chaos trained you to expect noise? What if genuine care feels almost invisible because your childhood taught you that love had to be earned through suffering? What if the absence of emotional drama isn't emptiness, but the very peace you've spent your entire life searching for without recognizing it? The mind resists this possibility because accepting it would require questioning everything it has mistaken for love. And that is where the deepest psychological conflict begins. Not between you and another person, but between the life your unconscious has been rehearsing and the life your soul has been quietly waiting to live. The moment you begin to recognize that conflict, something remarkable happens. You stop asking, why do I always attract the wrong people, and begin asking a far more powerful question. What inside me keeps recognizing them? That single shift changes everything, because it moves your attention away from fate and toward awareness, away from blame and toward understanding, away from the illusion that life is happening to you and toward the realization that something within you has been quietly participating all along. There is an ancient psychological idea that every child carries an invisible photograph of love. Not an actual photograph, but a living emotional image assembled from thousands of tiny moments. The way someone looked at them, the tone of a voice at the dinner table, the silence after disappointment, the warmth of a comforting embrace, the absence of one, the unpredictability of affection, the feeling of being seen or unseen. None of these moments seem extraordinary while they are happening. A child cannot step outside themselves and analyze their environment. They simply absorb it. Every repeated emotional experience becomes another brushstroke on an invisible portrait. By adulthood, that portrait has become so familiar that it no longer feels like a memory. It feels like reality itself. This is why two people can experience the exact same relationship and describe it completely differently. One feels deeply loved, the other feels emotionally neglected. Not because the relationship itself is entirely different, but because each person is comparing the present to a different internal blueprint. The unconscious is always comparing, always measuring, always asking, does this resemble what I learned love was supposed to feel like? Notice something fascinating. Children rarely question the emotional climate of their home. They adapt to it. If love is warm, they adapt. If love is cold, they adapt. If praise is conditional, they adapt. If criticism is constant, they adapt. Adaptation keeps the child alive. But what protects the child can imprison the adult, because the adaptation continues long after the danger has disappeared. Imagine spending years walking with a heavy backpack because you believed it contained everything necessary for survival. One day you discover the world has changed. You no longer need it. Yet your body has carried it for so long that walking without it feels wrong. You miss the weight. Not because the weight was good, because it became part of your identity. The same thing happens emotionally. Many people mistake emotional burden for emotional depth. They mistake longing for love. They mistake chasing for connection. They mistake emotional exhaustion for commitment. Their blueprint quietly tells them, if it isn't difficult, it isn't real. Listen carefully to that sentence. If it isn't difficult, it isn't real. How many relationships has that unconscious belief created? How many opportunities for peace has it quietly rejected? There is another hidden force at work here, one so subtle that most people never notice it. Your unconscious does not simply seek familiar people. It also tries to assign familiar roles. Without realizing it, you begin casting those around you into characters from your earliest emotional story. A partner becomes the parent whose approval you never earned. A friend becomes the sibling you competed against. A manager becomes the authority figure you feared disappointing. The world becomes a stage where the past continually auditions for the present. This is why one careless sentence from a loved one can suddenly feel devastating. The words themselves are only the surface. Beneath them, your unconscious hears echoes. It fills in missing meanings. It completes emotional sentences that were never actually spoken. Someone says, I need some space. Your unconscious hears, you're not enough. Someone forgets to call. Your unconscious hears, you don't matter. Someone seems distracted after work. Your unconscious hears, you're about to be abandoned. Notice how quickly interpretation becomes reality. The event lasts seconds, the emotional story lasts days, sometimes years. This is the extraordinary power of the unconscious mind. It is less interested in facts than in patterns. And once a pattern has been established, it begins searching for evidence that confirms its expectations. If you secretly believe you are difficult to love, you will notice every delayed reply, every forgotten promise, every subtle shift in someone's tone. Meanwhile, dozens of moments of affection pass unnoticed because they do not fit the existing story. The unconscious protects its map by filtering reality, not because it wishes to hurt you, because certainty feels safer than possibility. This is why healing often feels confusing at first. You begin meeting healthier people, you begin experiencing calmer relationships, yet instead of immediate relief you feel strangely restless. A part of you keeps waiting for something terrible to happen. The old blueprint whispers, this piece can't be trusted, so you become hypervigilant. You search for hidden signs. You analyze every message. You overthink every silence. Eventually, the anxiety becomes so uncomfortable that conflict almost feels like relief. At least conflict is familiar. At least now the world makes sense again. Can you see how powerful this cycle is? It convinces intelligent people that they are simply unlucky in love, when in reality they have been trying to solve yesterday using today's relationships. But there comes a moment, sometimes after one heartbreak, sometimes after 10, when the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. You begin recognizing the same emotional atmosphere wearing different faces. Different names, different cities, different personalities. Yet somehow the ending always feels hauntingly familiar. That realization is painful, but it is also the doorway to freedom. Because what is unconscious controls you. What becomes conscious gives you a choice. Choice does not appear when the world changes. Choice appears when awareness does. This is where many people become frightened. Because if the pattern is inside them, then they can no longer blame destiny alone. But this realization is not an accusation. It is an invitation. An invitation to finally meet the part of yourself that has been quietly steering your life from the shadows. The shadow is not evil. It is simply everything you learned to hide in order to belong. The child who believed they had to be perfect. The teenager who believed emotions were dangerous. The adult who smiles while silently fearing rejection. The part of you that still waits for permission to feel worthy. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your unfinished conversation with yourself. Every relationship has been trying to introduce you to it, not punish you, introduce you. Think about that. What if the people who triggered you most deeply were not merely obstacles? What if they were mirrors? Not mirrors reflecting your flaws, mirrors reflecting your hidden wounds. A mirror cannot create a scar. It can only reveal one that already exists. This changes the entire meaning of relationships. Instead of asking, why are they making me feel this way? You begin asking, what inside me is asking to be seen? That question softens something. It interrupts the endless cycle of projection. Because projection is one of the most fascinating psychological phenomena. We unconsciously place our unseen inner world onto other people. We accuse them of abandoning us before they have left. We expect them to criticize us before they have judged us. We imagine rejection before it exists, not because we are irrational, because our nervous system is trying to protect us from repeating old pain. Ironically, those attempts at protection often create the very experiences we fear. Fear of abandonment becomes clinginess. Clinginess creates pressure. Pressure creates distance. Distance confirms the original fear. The unconscious quietly says, see, I was right. The pattern survives, not because it was true, because it was repeated. But repetition is not destiny. Patterns are powerful. They are not permanent. The moment you begin observing your reactions instead of automatically obeying them, a small space appears. It is almost invisible at first. A single breath before speaking. A single moment before assuming. A single pause before chasing. Within that tiny space lies freedom. Not dramatic freedom, quiet freedom. The freedom to ask yourself, is this my partner speaking, or is this an old memory wearing their face? That question alone has saved countless relationships. And more importantly, it has saved countless people from spending their entire lives trying to heal childhood through romance. No partner can rewrite your past. No relationship can become the parent you never had. No amount of external love can permanently silence an internal wound that has never been acknowledged. Healing begins the moment you stop asking another person to carry responsibilities that belong to your own inner world. That does not mean you stop loving. It means you begin loving differently. You no longer search for someone to complete an unfinished childhood. You search for someone with whom you can build a conscious adulthood. One is driven by unconscious repetition, the other by intentional presence. There is an enormous difference. Perhaps the greatest transformation in love happens when attraction is no longer your only compass. Because attraction can point toward familiarity. Awareness points toward freedom. The strongest relationships are not built by two people who have never been wounded. They are built by two people willing to recognize when yesterday is trying to disguise itself as today. Two people willing to pause before reacting, to listen before projecting, to become curious before becoming certain. That is where love begins to mature, not when the butterflies disappear, but when awareness becomes stronger than repetition. Perhaps, after hearing all of this, you will notice something different the next time someone captures your attention. Instead of immediately asking, why am I so drawn to them? You may quietly ask yourself another question. What part of my past just recognized something in this person? And if you stay with that question long enough, without rushing to answer it, you may discover that the person you have been searching for all these years was never meant to rescue the child you once were. They were meant to meet the adult you are finally becoming. Because the greatest love story is not the one that repeats your oldest wounds. It is the one that gently ends their rule over your life. And perhaps that is the real purpose of every relationship, not to complete you, not to save you, but to illuminate the invisible places within you that have been patiently waiting all along to come into the light.